Chapter 17. Taibon. Tell me, if you would, is my medicine ready yet? Exactly once per day, Mao Mao was permitted to leave the room in which she was confined, in order to be taken, under guard, to Shenmei. Shenmei's room was so luxurious, one would never have believed it was in the middle of a fortress. The floor was covered by a thick rug of foreign make, and the furniture was likewise exotic. Aromas of tea and flowers and honey drifted through the air. The mistress of the room was reclining in an easy-chair, a lady-in-waiting polishing the nails of her left hand. A young man knelt nearby, massaging her feet. The room was thick with the smell of incense. Behind Shenmei was a large bed on which some women were rolling around and giggling. There was another odor in the air, too. Alcohol. The room was redolent of sheer decadence. Mao Mao sniffed audibly. It's some kind of mixture, she thought. A base of musk water, cut with several other ingredients. The woman lounging on the bed looked oddly lethargic, hard to tell if it was drunkenness or something else. Lolan was behind Shenmei, munching on a snack. Suide was combing her hair. In some other setting, they might have looked like two sisters sharing a sweet moment. Here, they looked only like master and servant. I believe it will take a little longer yet, Mao Mao replied. Gracious, is that so? With a wave of her fan, Shenmei sent Mao Mao back out of the room. Once she was safely back in the hallway, Mao Mao let out a deep sigh. Then she saw a familiar face looking in her direction. Hey, Apothecary! That smart aleck tone. It was Kyo. She never specifically told him her name, and he hadn't actually been introduced to her, hence why he simply called her Apothecary. Behind him was a lady-in-waiting she took to be his minder, along with 4 other boys. Yes, how can I help you? She asked politely. What she wanted to say was, yeah, what is it, you little shit? But this was hardly the time or place. Even Mao Mao had a sense of self-preservation, and with the lady-in-waiting, and her burly guard, present, she couldn't afford to level any abuse at him. Ew, creepy! He exclaimed. I want to smack him so bad. Mao Mao privately promised herself that the next time they were alone, she would give him the noogie of a lifetime. Although, sadly, it didn't seem like she was going to have the chance anytime soon. If you don't need anything from me, sir, I'd like to go back to my room. Mao Mao's situation was far from ideal, but she didn't object to what she was actually doing. She was provided with a supply of drugs that would have served admirably even in a proper medical office, even if many of them were getting old, and she was thrilled to have so many written materials to work with. Whoever the apothecary before her had been, they were quite talented. Hey, were there any other women in there? Yes, sir. I mean, for what it's worth. They hadn't been in much of a state to be seen by a young child. Such dissolution was not for the eyes of little boys. True, by the time she was Kyo's age, Mao Mao had been more acquainted with the copulation of men and women than that of, say, cats or dogs, and any blushing embarrassment she might once have felt at the thought was long gone. But this was different. So, my mom's in there. Did she look okay? I know she's been busy with work. After a second, Mao Mao replied, I'm afraid I couldn't tell you. I don't know which of the women you mean. Oh. Kyo looked downcast. There wasn't much Mao Mao could say. She thought she knew which woman was his mother, but she hadn't been fit to tell him about. Guess that's how it goes, huh? I mean, Mom's busy. Maybe I should have waited back at the village for her. So that's his story. She didn't know whose idea it had been, but it had been a wise choice. Better to have him stay at the hot springs town than see his mother here. Maybe it had even been his mother's idea. If you'll excuse me, she said. Oh, hey! Kyo looked like he was about to say something to Mao Mao, but then he glanced around and was silent. Whatever he'd wanted to say, evidently this wasn't the place for it. If I may, then. Yeah, sure. Mao Mao went back to her room. Several more days passed, each much the same as the others. The one thing that seemed really strange to Mao Mao was how she could hear children's voices outside her door. Kyo and the others, maybe? Each time they approached, a lady-in-waiting would scold them and lead them away. Evidently, they were supposed to steer clear of this room. I guess I understand. Small animals were brought into Mao Mao's room for experimental purposes. She kept the place as clean as she could, but it couldn't exactly be called hygienic. It does sort of stink in here. The smell came partly from the rats, but sometimes there was a whiff of something else, something vile. A smell not unlike animal dung or rotten eggs. She often caught the smell drifting up from the stairs when she was taken to Shenmei's room. Maybe they were doing something on one of the lower levels. She thought back to the disassembled Feifa she'd seen at the village. Maybe they were researching the weapons here too. I hope nothing explodes, she thought. But at the moment, she had no time to worry about such things. The materials left by the previous apothecary showed that in pursuit of an immortality drug, many experiments had been done regarding a resurrection drug as well. Her predecessor hadn't been far from either, but neither had they been precisely close. Yet Suide had successfully revived on the basis of these experiments, so they'd had their worth. As for the drug that really mattered, the elixir of immortality, there were only the most basic remarks, beauty products and things that might help purify the body's systems. Well, what else could one expect? There's no such thing as a panacea, after all. Nothing cures all ills. In the same way, the deterioration of the human body could be slowed, but it can never be stopped. Live a decent life, eat nutritious foods, and exercise regularly. That was the best method. But Shenmei wanted something she could simply take a sip of and make herself 10 years younger. And there is no such thing. Mamo understood that perfectly well, yet she had her pride as an apothecary, and doing nothing was clearly not an option. I guess this isn't any easier for you than it is for me, she said to the rats. Then, too, while they might be here purely to have drugs tested out on them, they were being fed regularly, so they were plumper than your ordinary rat. They had one pair for breeding, and kept the rest separated, lest the fortress be overrun with rat spawn. She considered the fact that to judge whether an immortality drug had worked, she would have to observe the rat for at least the duration of its natural life. It's enough to make me lightheaded. According to the last apothecary's materials, rats generally lived about 3 years, maybe 4 in some exceptional individual cases, and I'm sure as hell not going to be here for 4 years. Nonetheless, she set about making the chubby rats food. That was what she was doing when she heard a voice outside. There were footsteps, too. It was time for the changing of the guard. Maybe that means I'll get to eat soon. She knew by now that breakfast and dinner usually arrived after the guard was changed. She set down her mortar and pestle, yawned widely, and stretched her arms, making little circles with them. Then there was a thump. She saw something on the ground by the doorframe. When she got closer, she discovered a scrap of paper that seemed to have gotten wedged under the door. She opened it and found a message in a child's messy scrawl. Run for it. I'll draw off the guard. The message included a piece of wire, wrapped into a circle to fit. Kyo? Mau thought. Maybe he realized she was a hostage, or perhaps he saw that even being at the stronghold was a dangerous proposition. She didn't know which. But she saw that in his own way, and despite being a brat, he was thinking of her. Unfortunately, the thin piece of wire wasn't going to be nearly enough to open the door to this room. For one thing, it wasn't as if she didn't have plenty of wire, and better, right in here with her. As for the plan itself, it was as simple and childish as the handwriting. She heard Kyo's voice on the other side of the door. Let go! Let me go! Whatever he'd thought he would do to take care of the guard, he had obviously failed. What do you think you were doing? Kyo was in a formal seated position on the floor, his clothes slightly disheveled by a little rampage. The guard had called Suide, who'd come in a hurry when she'd heard there had been an attempt to free Mau Mau. Mau Mau had likewise been dragged out of her room again. What do you mean? Kyo said, trying to play dumb. Suide gave him a cold look, then turned to Mau Mau. You put him up to this, didn't you? Whatever do you mean? Mau Mau asked, discreetly crushing the piece of paper in her hand. Oh, that's it. I was just playing like usual when I saw that guard there was slacking off. That's what happened. Kyo was totally unrepentant, and Mau Mau figured her best bet was to play along. Even Suide seemed to acknowledge as much. The only one who seemed to have dug in his heels was the guard, the same one who stood at Mau Mau's door ever since she'd arrived here. Are you calling me a liar? Kyo demanded. Suide ignored his protest, but gave him a withering stare. So it was really nothing? Then listen, I never want nothing to happen again. Yeah, I hear you. The guards still looked less than pleased, but all was well that ended well, as long as they could agree that all was, in fact, well. At least it's over, Mau Mau thought. Except it wasn't. Goodness, what's all this? Mau Mau felt a shock of fear raise gooseflesh all over her body. Tack, tack of footsteps sounded through the hallway. The owner must have been wearing wooden clogs for them to echo like that. Suide's color got worse and worse as the sound approached, and she wasn't alone. Kyo and the guard both went pale as well. This was why Suide had been trying so hard to wrap things up quickly. And then Shenmei was there. She must have just gotten out of the bath, for her hair was damp, tied up but not very elaborately. She was wearing makeup, but thinner than usual, giving the impression that she was blushing. Behind her were two ladies in waiting, and Lolan. Kyo's eyes sparkled for an instant when he saw them. His mouth twitched, but he didn't make a sound. Maybe one of the ladies was his mother. "Nothing that warrants your attention, ma'am." "No, by all means, tell me. I'm most interested as to why the apothecary is not in her room." It was obvious that half-baked excuses weren't going to fly with Shenmei. Suide, bowing to reality, said briskly, "I'm given to understand that Kyo was playing outside this room here, and distracted the guard. Purely for form's sake, I was asking the apothecary for her perspective on events." "Oh, have you been a bad boy?" Shenmei's gaze settled on Kyo, whose eyes began to brim with tears. "That won't do. If you don't behave, then we'll have to discipline you." She stood in front of Kyo and stroked his cheek, the sharp jade nail caps on her fingers jabbing his soft skin. Perhaps a little smack on the bottom. "Lady Shenmei," Suide began, but she stopped mid-sentence. Go on." "Kyo is only a young child, and he did nothing of any consequence." She trailed off, her voice growing quieter and quieter. Kyo was still watching the lady in waiting behind Lolan, Suide, and Shenmei. The woman had a vacant look in her eyes. Shenmei cocked her head. "Well, but that must mean someone here made a very big fuss out of a very little thing." Her gaze moved to the guard. "Certainly not, ma'am," he said. "No, and yet it seems you're the one at fault here, and that means you have to be disciplined." In her mind, Mao Mao could almost see the cruel twisting of Shenmei's mouth where it was hidden behind her folding fan. Was it possible this woman derived sexual pleasure from inflicting pain on others? "Perhaps some time in the water prison to think about what you've done?" "Ma'am!" "Geez, that's outrageous." Mao Mao didn't know exactly what the water prison was, but it was much too cold to be forcing someone to stay in standing water. Mao Mao doubted Shenmei cared about the reason. She just enjoyed tormenting people. Mao Mao wanted nothing more to do with her. But at the same time, people like Shenmei pissed her off. Maybe that's why she was speaking before she could stop herself. "You old witch." The words slipped quietly from her mouth, but Shenmei seemed to hear them quite clearly. She was, after all, the oldest person there. Almost before she knew what had happened, Mao Mao was flying sideways, her ear and temple throbbing. When she fought back the pain enough to open her eyes, she saw Shenmei, beet red, her fan upraised. "This confirms it. I'm an idiot," Mao Mao thought. But her idiocy wasn't over yet. "I told the boy to do it," she said. Shenmei's face contorted with rage. She looked like a mythical warrior demon. Someone less stout of heart might have wet themselves at her expression at that moment. But Mao Mao had plenty of experience with cruel old women. Her problem was that this cruel old woman knew no restraint. Next, the fan came down hard on her shoulder. "Another worthless apothecary, I see!" Shenmei spat at her, while Mao Mao held her shoulder. Shenmei took a breath, but her anger obviously hadn't abated. "Very well. Perhaps we can inspire some repentance. Put her in the water prison." "Yep, I'm in trouble now." She brought it on herself. Bought and paid for. Maybe she should have kept her mouth shut, not worried about Kyo or the guard. But there was another idiot there, just like Mao Mao. "But, Lady Shenmei, then we'll be without an apothecary again." Shenmei grimaced at Suide's words. Suide stepped forward as if to say more, but the fan came down promptly on her shoulder. "Don't move without being told!" "My sincere apologies, milady. However..." The fan came down again, this time on her forehead, where it split the skin, producing a trickle of red blood. Shenmei grabbed Suide's hair and dragged her close, so that they were face to face. Just as Mao Mao was wondering what she might do, she licked the blood flowing from Suide's forehead. Mao Mao wasn't sure what to think. "However noble the blood might once have been, once sullied, it can never be clean again." Shenmei spat the combination of blood and saliva into a piece of scrap paper, then flung it at Suide. "I can't use this any longer," she said, throwing away the folding fan she had been holding. One of the ladies in waiting immediately held out another one to her. Did they just carry a supply at all times? Did Shenmei beat people bloody that often? Suide dabbed at her forehead with a handkerchief, but she didn't move. She simply stood there, her eyes fixed on Mao Mao. It seems like she has a strong sense of duty, Mao Mao thought. Suide acted like she felt somehow responsible for Mao Mao. True, it was partly due to her own curiosity that the apothecary was now trapped in this fortress, but nonetheless, Suide was obviously trying to protect her. But she was facing far too evil a force. Lolan stepped up behind her mother, her face impassive as she said, "Dearest mother." Shenmei didn't look up from playing with her new fan. "Yes, what?" "Since we went to all the trouble of having it made ready, I want to use... you know. It's been so long since we put it to good use." "What's you know?" Mao Mao wondered. The way Lolan spoke made it sound deeply significant. "Ah, the Taibon," Shenmei said. Suide cringed visibly. Taibon. It sounded vaguely familiar, but Mao Mao couldn't quite remember what it was. "It's a bit on the small side, but certainly large enough for one person. I do seem to remember our last test of it being quite... effective." This time she looked at Suide, whose face grew even more bloodless, and who clenched her fists so hard her knuckles turned white. "Yes, let's go with that today," Shenmei said with a smile. She glanced at two guards with her. They each took one of Mao Mao's arms and dragged her away. Mao Mao found herself taken to the basement of the stronghold, down a staircase of angular stone steps to a place that was rather humid. There was a wooden door into a circular room about 2 kan, 3.5 meters, across. The floor was sunk by roughly 2 shaku, 60 centimeters, but otherwise there appeared to be nothing in it. The guard shoved Mao Mao into the room and hung a lamp along one wall. The ceiling was high over her head. There was a single window, well out of reach. "Sorry, kid. Lady Shenmei's orders," one of the guards said. He sounded sympathetic, for all it was worth. A large wooden box was brought into the cell. The guard looked at it, profoundly uncomfortable. Then he opened the lid and immediately ducked out of the room and closed the door. Something squirmed and writhed inside the chest. Something trying desperately to crawl out into the light. "Ah, I see now." Yes, she had heard of the Taibon. It was a form of punishment invented by a mad king in some ancient era. One dug a large hole and put a criminal in it, a hole occupied by creatures like those now squirming inside the box. Mao Mao shivered, feeling goosebumps all over her flesh. She knew now why Suide was so afraid of snakes. The writhing thing raised its sickle-shaped head from the box. A long, red tongue flicked out of its mouth. It watched her with moist eyes, looking for all the world like a living rope. Some small bugs scuttled out of the chest, followed by a croaking frog. Mao Mao began to laugh. "Ha! Ha ha ha!" Her eyes brimmed. A grin split her face from ear to ear. What beautiful creatures. She hadn't seen their like for a long time. Still laughing, Mao Mao took the hair stick from her hair and produced the hairpin from the folds of her robe. From the box exploded an innumerable parade of snakes and poisonous bugs.